This is now recording. So welcome to this webinar, which is part of Social Sciences Week, which is a national week where we try to bring social science researchers together with non-academic audiences to talk about the value of social sciences to everyday lives. So I'd like to start, my name's Jen Bond. I'm a member of the Institute for Land, Water and Society, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar tonight. So I'd like to firstly, before we officially start, to acknowledge the Wiradjuri and Barapai people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which CSU is based. And I'd like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, and extend that to other Indigenous people who are with us tonight. So tonight is about collaboration is vital for addressing complex environmental issues, from supplying fresh water in the Murray-Darling Basin and living and thriving in Australia's wildly fluctuating climate, to managing natural resources such as water, soil, native plants and animals, and regional and rural communities that depend on and live with these resources. So no one person or organisation can successfully address all of these complex issues. Research institutes, government agencies and community can bring together complementary expertise, experience and resources to address the issues. But few instances of successful long-term collaboration between these groups have been recorded. So Wes Ward and a group of social and environmental researchers from Sturt University are investigating the possible barriers for establishing and maintaining these collaborations, and has completed preliminary work involving organisations in the Murray River Valley. So Wes is an adjunct research fellow who has worked in science communication and training in the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia and Australia for 32 years. Since completing his PhD, he has been looking into what makes collaborations tick between scientists, government agents and landholders for natural resource management and sustainable agriculture in Australia. So I'd like to hand over to Wes, who has a presentation called Can Birds of Different Feathers Flock Together? I think it's called. If you want to share your screen, Wes. The chat box is open, and depending on how we go, I think it's going to be fairly informal, and we'll answer some questions perhaps during or at the end. We'll see how we go, so fairly informal. But over to you, Wes. Can you share your screen?
I will in a second. I'll just welcome everyone tonight. Great to see you all. Thanks for coming along, and thanks very much to Jen for the welcome. I'll hit the share button. And hopefully you'll be starting to see my screen. Is that coming through, Jen?
Right. Yep, we've got you. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, everyone. Tonight I'm going to be looking at lots of birds of different feathers and how we all flock together in addressing all sorts of issues in natural resource management and sustainable agriculture, and some of the work, the preliminary work we've done in this area. Now, we've just had a slight glitch here. Forward ho, that's better. Collaboration really is vital for natural resource management, as we don't have all the skills and expertise in one place, in one organisation, in one agency. And I think it's really important that recognising that no one place is an expert, particularly where we're looking at localised expertise, localised knowledge, and knowledge that's not embodied in or not seen in academic institutions. Sometimes it's also competitive. Sometimes we've got people working in different institutions, different universities, different agencies, and they can actually quietly or quite overtly you know, compete with each other in trying to get their voice heard. In this work, it actually comes out of my PhD that I completed in what's now 4 years ago in Southeast Asia. And it was really interesting there where the differences, and I was looking at Australian and Lao researchers working in natural resource management and agriculture. It was really interesting having a look at what were the barriers for their communication and the way that they work together in teams, in research teams. And on coming back and looking more in Australia, it was actually interesting how few, how little research, peer-reviewed research had actually been done in it. It was all scattered. It was all in government reports and in you know, university reports, but there was nothing that actually brought it together and tried to look at, you know, get down to the nitty-gritty of what were these barriers. So we decided to have a look at it. And I've got there's a small team of us who have got other research interests as well. But it's been an interesting thing of actually gathering together environmental scientists and social researchers in one room, looking at some of these things. My experience, and I think it's a really important thing for social researchers to recognise this, is to recognise your experience and how it might influence your research. For myself, I go, as Jen's pointed out, 32 years from everything from teaching in Western Australia through to working for a couple of agencies in the Pacific Islands. I was contracted to do some work in Southeast Asia, helping agricultural and natural resource managers to look at how they communicated their science. And then, and 25 years working with researchers and teachers at CSU and all sorts of other different people over that time. So over that time, I've been able to have a look at, you know, how people work together and if they do work together and why they don't. And yeah, so I've got a real passion and interest in this area. So to do this, I looked at setting up an exploratory study to start with. So far, we've looked at 3 different agencies in the Murray Valley. The Institute for Land, Water and Society at Charles Sturt University. That gave us an idea of some researchers, gave me access to them. Government agents through the North East Catchment Management Authority. I was able, they're people who work very closely with local communities, landholders, how they, and I looked at how both they worked with them, but more particularly how they also worked with researchers in doing their work. And then I also have found a group which Jen and I are both involved with, which is the National Agricultural Production and Reconciliation Ecology Centre, commonly known as NAPREC, based in Deniliquin, further down the Murray Valley. And they're particularly a bunch of farmers. And it's been, and they've added some real richness to what we've been able to find thus far. Now, part of this research I'm going to be talking about is there. We can make this presentation available later. So if you wanted to have a look at this report that I've put together with myself and one of my co-workers, Mike Vanderzee, we've put out a report about this later on. So you can get a lot more details if you want to go down that path later. So what did we find about some of these barriers between organisations? And that was all 3 levels. So that was researchers, that was government agents, as well as landholders and farmers. What we found was 5 basic areas or 5 groups of issues that really produce barriers between these organisations. One was a lack of commonality, another poor communication between them. There was competitions and tensions between organisations, and not just between, but within. There was also a set of external drivers and pressures, the environment, the ecosystem around those organisations. And then there was stuff actually within the organisations and within the people themselves. So you could see we were working not so much up at the policy level, we're working down at the grassroots. We're looking at people and we're looking at organisations and we're looking at groups and what helps them or what are the barriers for those people in working together. So I want to go in and have a little bit of a closer look at what were some of the things that have come out so far. To do that, we got very down and dirty, as you can see in the photo there. And I'll use a few instances of this. This was us working out at Deniliquin at a farm to the south of Denny, and it just happened to be that that night a very large dumping of rain happened. So we literally did get very down and dirty. Now, the lack of commonality really showed through with the legal and institutional boundaries and the different boundaries that different organisations had to work with. And what was interesting was the understanding that different organisations had of those boundaries and constraints, particularly when they changed. And this is really important, I think, when you've got, in this day and age, a lot of casual employees, there's not that, you know, an organisation doesn't build up that corporate knowledge, that corporate understanding of what's happening in other organisations. And, you know, when if someone's on a short-term casual contract, they don't often pass on that knowledge. So if they get an understanding of, say, some other researchers in a research institute up the road, they don't necessarily pass that on. And that was really, really noticeable in the interviews that we did between ILWS and North East CMA and the people within them. And similar sorts of things happen down that list. So, you know, knowledge about goals and the sharing of those goals. The lack of mutual understanding of what each organisation does and means. And that bottom one there, negative past experiences and relationships, that had quite a big bearing as well. Those ones, and I should also have on the bottom one as well for NAPREC there, that also for the farmers was things that really stood out with them as real blockers for them in the way that organisations work with local groups. The next bunch of issues was around communication. There's some of the usual suspects, such as poor communication between organisations, outdated understanding of each other. It sort of comes from that last one as well. Unknown expertise. That was again something that comes out particularly with casualisation of workforces. And the last two were particularly important for the farmers. And indeed, you know, as that photo sort of alludes to, there's distances that are caused have been caused through this communication, and you almost need to have something electronic like a microphone to be able to get your voice heard over all the stuff that's happening, but also to get across the distances between organisations. But the farmers were particularly concerned with the little regard for past experiences and history, particularly at the regional and local level, where organisations were coming from outside their local area. There was that, I mean, there's always that thing, you know, you hear about in small regional towns about the outsiders coming in. But when there's also a past history and past experiences that town draws on, that becomes a real barrier and a real blocker for new organisations. And again, on that last point, the casualisation, it's a real blocker for setting up those long-term and established relationships. Competitions and tensions, these were more so organisational. It did not appear so much for farming groups, but particularly between government agencies and research institutes and universities. And I think the recent, and my reading of all the recent changes to legislation and to policies regarding resourcing in natural resource management is not helping. The competitive funding has really caused tensions between groups, and it also has caused internal tensions and competition too, and they have really been barriers within and between organisations. And of course, it's led to some people just walking away. They don't want to hang around, they're out of here, they don't want to be part of if there's just too much tension. External drivers. This has been a big one, and it's been very interesting looking at the water policy changes, the water policy arrangements. In fact, the whole Murray-Darling Basin Plan has been a really interesting essay in conflict, in barriers, and it has really also caused a lot of problems between organisations and people in those organisations across the Murray-Darling Basin. And the one that really struck for the farming groups with NAPREC was the insufficient time for relationships on the whole. They found that this really created a barrier more and more in recent years. There have been some great examples where this is not true, and it's been a really interesting process of hunting those down, and we'll actually talk about that in a little while. And again, that final point there, the short-term projects with leading to high staff turnover. Again, casualisation, short-term projects has meant that there is insufficient time. So that time really is one of the main external drivers, allowing enough time. And isn't it interesting how sometimes even the old, the really old, not just people, but really old gear that has been used in the past actually may be useful and still have a place in collaborations and in helping collaborations. And as we found, there's nothing quite beats face-to-face communication in this time of Zoom and other online communications. I don't think we can forget that. And I had to put this photo in. Personal traits, and I think you know where I'm going to go with this one. egos, personal self-interest. But also really interestingly, one thing that the farmers also really found was lack of mutual professional respect was something that really was a barrier for them. They felt sometimes that, not just sometimes, that there was this lack of respect for their knowledge, their expertise, their experiences, and that really did cause a barrier. Now, much of what I said is probably not too far removed from people's experiences. If you've been on this earth for a while, you may have seen a fair bit of this. And indeed, it's really interesting in doing, reading through and finding out about collaboration. So much of this work in the past and so many of these barriers and issues have actually been found in things like health, education, and particularly in business. Business and international business have done a lot of research in this area of how to address some of these barriers. And I think we've got a lot to learn, coming back to why we're doing this, this series and really doing Social Studies Week. I think there's a real opportunity there for people who in the audience may be social science researchers to look across different disciplines and find what they've done. I noted in my PhD that there wasn't much in natural resource management or in agriculture, but there was a bundle in business. And I picked up a lot of stuff out of business and hopefully have been able to bring it across into the area of natural resource management. Look, I'm going to just hold there for a sec, take a breath, take a quick drink of water, and I'll throw it open if there's anyone's got any questions or comments at this stage. Hopefully you also have been using chat, and if you've got any questions, Jen's also I'm very grateful to her. She's moderating and monitoring that for me. So if anyone's got any questions before we go on, because we want to have a look at so what next. So just quickly.
So we do have some in the chat room, Wes, if you want to go to the chat.
Yep,
so Claude asks, in regional areas, does casualised employment look different? I'm thinking in terms of the relationships that casual employees may have with an organisation and their local area.
I think that is one thing. We can be casuals, but we also can be residents of a locality. And I think if we are doing work in regional areas, if we are working in our local area, like myself speaking to you tonight from Albury, I've probably got a better chance of having relationships with people outside of my work. So I've been a school parent, I've been a soccer dad standing on sidelines. I do shopping. I'm down at the supermarket, and I've got a greater chance, I think, of meeting people in that situation. And indeed, some of the stuff that I've been able to do professionally has actually come out of these personal relationships. So I think in regional areas, we do have that opportunity. I think where the problem happens is when we go out of our localities, out of our regional areas, and we work in other regions, we then take on a similar persona as anyone who even comes from a metro area. We are not known to those people. And it takes a while to build those relationships. As we'll talk about in a minute with our friends down at Denny, it's taken us, I think, some years to build a relationship with them. And so it should, because it does take that time to build both professional and the personal relations that I think needs to happen in regional areas and rural areas. to really get effective collaboration.
Great. So we have another just a comment, but you could speak to it. Where's your battery's running low?
I am, sorry. Oops, I'll just plug myself in. 1 second. There, I'm plugged in.
Good to go. So Anne says, sometimes people move to another area after their 1, 2 or 3 year contract finishes if there is no continuing funding.
And that is, I think that's one of our real problems with our current funding system and cycles. It was a very interesting thing I found. There's one particular project based around the southwest slopes of New South Wales, run out of ANU and Australian National University, and it was based on particularly around one personality, one project leader, who was able to build a bunch of people around him and build a reputation across the region. And I think it's a real interesting story of how relationships can take a long time to build, but he was able to build a research project and program, and that actually, even though people were coming in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the project kept that relationship going. So he still had that interest after 10, 15 years, and he had a few key staff with him that also stayed on. And luckily we were able to actually pick up one of those staff at Charles Sturt University too, with that long-term relationship. And that has been that was a real boon for them in getting their work recognised also, not just by government agencies, but also by local farmer groups, and groups like Landcare were really appeared to be sitting up and listening to what was being done through that group.
Cool. So if we go back to just what you were saying to the previous comment, there's a question here about whether you have any tips for someone who is new to a regional area in building those crucial relationships with community and stakeholders.
Lucky you mentioned that. In the next set of slides, I'm actually going to go in and have a look at what we've done based on our preliminary work, what we've done to try and build up some relationships, and hopefully they'll give you some hints of what we've done to start with, but also hopefully get some conversation going when we finish about what other people might have found has helped in there. So I'm going to throw that, I'll take that question on notice. Hopefully the next set of slides will help. But then I think if we could have some conversation about that later on, I think that could be really useful too.
Great, that links well with this other comment around, I think, having that conversation later around time permitting. Lucinda has a few comparative findings to make in regard to successful as opposed to unsuccessful collaboration practice in regional areas. So that fits.
Fantastic.
Exactly
that could be really useful. Yeah. Thanks, Lucinda. Yep, we'll definitely be calling on that experience when we're when we get through this.
So that's it from the chat for now.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, faithful sidekick, Jen. Okay, so moving along, if my computer screen allows me, what we've done with this research that we've done, we're actually using a little bit of an action research model, and that means, for people who are not familiar with that term, is we're actually using what we're finding to help work on some of the issues that we've found as we're going. So we're using it, using those results that we found there to kick into gear a few actions see what works, see what doesn't work, and also engender then some more research opportunities. And so that's part of what we've been able to do. And hopefully even this evening may bring up some opportunities as well. So some of the things that we're looking at is looking at how we can establish some common goals and objectives between organisations to help break down barriers. Looking at even a joint research strategy, and we can give a couple of, or one example of that one. Building shared and ongoing understanding. Supporting time to maintain relations. And I think this is a real organisational question, is in this current time, can organisations just give their people in their research projects that little bit of time and recognise that the time taken to get on the phone and have a half-hour chat with a collaborator, that's actually good time. That's well spent. Particularly, not necessarily talking about specifically the project, but actually building those relationships, building that ability to be able to work together in all sorts of situations. And that sort of relates to organisations building that collaborative culture. Encouraging people to work together within the organisation, and also encouraging people to go outside of their organisation to work with collaborators. Thinking and remembering what I said earlier on about that, we don't have all the expertise in one place. We don't all have all that experience in one place. So, we've got to go hunting for it a bit as well. Now, for some people this evening, that's not new. But I think for some organisations, that realisation comes and goes a bit. And I think we can't lose sight that sometimes, we need to really press that point home. And I think the overall thing is building that trust. I think all of these things help build that trust between the collaborators. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, that trust and the associated respect that comes with it. So some initial actions that we've done. We've done some presentation of key findings. So we actually developed a one-pager that we developed about our project. Firstly, we went to the managers and said, hey, this is what we've found. This is what it might mean for your organisation. So what do you think? Do you think it's something that your organisation can take on? Both organisations, that was ILWS and NECMA, said, yes, we'd like to. And so, however, COVID-19 stepped in. We were going to do organise a speed dating event to help where people from both organisations came together to start developing some shared understandings and contacts and identify what might be the barriers that we have between our organisations. That's sort of been put on hold for now. I think a few of you will understand we're probably just treading water in these times, but hopefully we will be able to get back to that one. And we are looking at other opportunities as well to see if we can organise things via Zoom, for example, seeing if the technology will allow us to do it. And what we wanted to do, was to be able to feed these speed dating events and the results and some of the findings out of that back into developing not a talk fest or a conflab or anything like that, but actually an agreement that might help really engender some collaboration between organisations of different, different types of organisations. And we're actually looking at that between CSU and NECMA, and also looking at that with NAPREC as well. They're all ongoing discussions that we're having. Again, COVID has been a problem for that one. We really want to do some of these things face to face. That's also something I particularly found when I was working in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Face to face is still number one, regardless of what TikTok will tell you. And we also done recently a little, and I hope Jen won't mind me mentioning this, as she's been involved with this as well as a co-author, is looking at opportunities to start small projects together between different groups. And a really interesting one for me in particular, not having done it before, was actually to write an academic paper with farmers. You'll notice as here, we got out and dirty in a paddock with farmers and some of our government agencies and private providers and that, out on a farm at Denny. And that was one way, I think, of breaking the ice and starting to form those relations. Some of those people, for example, the person on the right-hand side there, Louise Burge, we actually met for the first time there. And that's a few years ago now. And, we've been building our relationships since then. And I think that's been a really important thing, is that face-to-face, but getting out and in someone else's world, someone else's reality, that is really important. So vice versa, that point 4 there was actually bringing some farmers into the academics world. And for us, part of our world, and for some of us not an inconsiderable part of that world, is writing papers. And I think for them it's been a bit of an eye-opener about what it takes to write an academic paper. And so, yeah, it's been a really great exercise of whether we get it published or not. I think for me personally, the actual exercise of doing this paper with some farmers is absolutely fantastic. It's really opened their eyes a bit about how we work and how we've been part of how we work in the world. And they're, quite excited about being part of it as well. And I suppose I just want to throw a few questions out there. I hope that's given you some ideas about how social research is working in collaborations, how it's working in regional Australia. And how it's also working across organisations that are based in regional areas. Some of the barriers that we've found, some of the ways that we're looking to initially address it. We certainly don't say that we've got all the answers, because really the answers are going to come out of the people that are working together. The researchers, the government agencies that we're working with, and also the community that overall we serve, and the community that we're working with. We think there's some real opportunities out there for all of us to learn together. So a great co-learning experience, but also that we can all get something out of this as well, and build up a better Australia as part of it. So I suppose before I finish up my presentation part of this evening, I'll just throw a few questions for you to get us kicked off. Do you think, or have you got examples of how your organisation has got a culture to encourage collaboration? Is there things that you're doing out there that you found really helps working with community, working with other organisations? Second one, then taking that a step further, how do you think, given the current political and funding cycles, and indeed the pandemic, how that's affecting how we can work together across regional Australia? And thirdly, are we at a more personal level, are we actually talking and listening together? How well are we doing that? And I think that particularly taking how so much of our communication is now online, you know, how much are we on the same page? Do we have that mutual understanding? Can we understand what, you know, what we are doing together? And if not, how can we address this? How do you think we could achieve this? And yeah, so I throw it open. I throw those questions, but also a few of those other things. And Lucinda, I'd be particularly interested to hear from you during the time that we've got left. So I'll throw it to you, Jen. If you could moderate for us, that'd be great.
Sure. So I would invite people to unmute and ask a question verbally. So I can see Lucinda, you're there. Would you like to get us started?
Yes, look, I'd like to make a comment because I found it very interesting to hear as you talked, Wes, because I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to do an evaluation of a group of 4 human service organisations here in Shepparton that had been funded by a philanthropic organisation to work collaboratively. And it was a very successful collaboration. And I was thinking as you were talking, yes, it was like the mirror opposite. There was a commitment to collaborative practice that was there in the minutes, even as these organisations applied for funding. There were pre-existing relationships there. All the people knew one another from an earlier time. There was also the assistance of an independent facilitator. Also, the funding organisation was very keen to see that the collaboration succeeded, so they weren't under pressure to meet the usual kind of very tough guidelines that can apply to grants and meeting deadlines. There was flexibility there. There was also a document that was drawn up that was part of it to actually, that was one, in fact, they were funded for 4 different projects, each group. And one of them was to develop a document to guide and govern the collaboration. And that was one of the first things to do. So that was an agreement there. And then the other things were to do more with front of house and back of house services and reviewing those. And it was a model example of successful collaboration. And there was that commitment to collaboration, and also it just worked together as a really good example of collaborative practice. And I suppose I was thinking as you talked that if I had to give a sort of a 3-minute about what I found, I did think it was those things of trust, common purpose or common values, and regular communication. And in this case, it was face-to-face communication. And it was the 4 CEOs of the 4 organisations drove these projects, and they'd come together and meet. And CEOs don't get a chance to chat necessarily with other CEOs about the struggles they're having. So this was it was a very important support group, but it was a very successful collaborative arrangement. And I just kept thinking every time you were talking about what wasn't necessarily working, it was in this instance. So I feel like we've got a kind of a matching pair there.
Yeah.
The way you talk. So thank you.
Bookends, perhaps.
Yes, bookends. But, and being in Shepparton, there was the regional dimension of it came into effect, I think, because these people over time knew one another, had known one another, worked together in various come round the table for other projects in the past. And also there was a sense when you talked about external drivers or factors, it's a very competitive tendering environment for grants for human service organisations. So this was an opportunity to do something different and demonstrate that you can achieve efficiencies and innovation collaboratively, not just by having to be competitive. That was an interesting finding too. So thank you. I found what you had to say was just like, oh, it's thank you.
That's fabulous. No, thanks very much, Lucinda. I'll take that as a tick then. I think it's really interesting too. One of the things, and it might not have come out as much, but is commitment is one thing you could also see, is that the organisations, through their CEOs and through the funding agency, committed to doing it. And I think that recognition that it needs support from above, as well as, you know, desires from people below to get this collaboration working, that's really integral. It's got to come from both ways. If you've got them fighting, or if you've got, you know, different leaders, you've got people at the ground level willing to collaborate, but the leaders just not coming together. Yeah, it makes it really difficult. And this was something that came out in quite a few of the interviews that I did. Yeah, thank you. That was really good. Now, Jen, do you think that has also answered any other questions that you might have in chat, or do you want to throw out
There's
in the
another
chat?
one here. So from Claude, I wonder if you see a specific role for citizen science projects in assisting the recognition of different knowledge stakeholders and mutual professional respect, or is it presenting a different type of challenge, as citizen science projects are typically reliant on volunteers, a variant perhaps of the casualisation process?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think some projects are seeing citizen science as a cheap way of doing research as well, natural research. And I just see it as a different type of research. I see citizen science as actually really important way of integrating a commitment from local communities, but also local knowledge and building that local and building respect for that local knowledge. It can be a different type of knowledge, and you see that with Indigenous, where Western scientists are working with Indigenous scientists, and there's some examples coming out in social research, where there's been some social research done, for example, particularly in Northern Australia, and in water research in the southern basin of the Murray-Darling Basin, is the importance of traditional knowledge or local knowledge in natural resource management, and in providing some more knowledge that is not necessarily coming out with Western knowledge. I think the trick is trying to bring those together, and having these two knowledges separate is not doing that. I think really the only place we can do it is collaboratively. How that's done collaboratively is still being looked at. I know of a couple of projects where people have set up or are looking to set up what's been termed communities of practice. And these communities of practice are actually specifically looking at how we can bring together traditional and Western science together. And I see citizen science and that particularly that localised science in a similar vein, bringing together people's local knowledge, their local observations, and bringing it together with Western science to be able to build a more complete picture than what we're able to do just as scientists, particularly when we're limited by funding and scope and time to how much we can do at any one time.
Great. So we have another comment from Suzanne. The experience of participating in a collaborative project could be the first step to an organisation perhaps going solo to applying for grants, etc.
Yeah, it can be. I come back, I suppose, to my point, but I don't think any one organisation can have every expert and level of knowledge that they need to take on all projects or even a project. I think to do sometimes to look at, particularly when they look at, sorry, I'll preface that, looking at very complex NRM problems. I think of things particularly in water management or climate change. It is a very difficult thing to do, and you'll see that more in recent years. Collaborations across the basin, for example, as one way of getting this regional or localised knowledge into a research project is actually getting organisations from different parts of the basin becoming part of that research. So I really think it probably goes back to what is the goal of the research, how wide are you trying to go, and how complex is that project or that problem that you're addressing through the research. So yeah, I do see that, you know, through that collaboration, yes, they can go solo, but it may mean that they're actually limited down to quite a narrow level of research, or it might be down to a much more localised or regional project.
So for our last question, I might circle back to Amy's question about tips for someone who is new to a regional area in building those crucial relationships with community and stakeholders to finish off.
Yes, Amy. Look, I cannot speak less highly enough of supermarket lines and soccer sidelines. I met so many people incidentally in my local community through those social, sporting, all sorts of events, going along to arts events, going along to the gallery, getting involved in local community meant for me, and I saw this particularly as a teacher, so much of what you do in the classroom would finish up back in community and in building those relations that then helped further on for in professions. So I really think when you go regional, if you're coming from metro or you're going from one region to another, you cannot beat immersing yourself in the local community, if particularly you want to build professional profile. And I think that's something in education circles and in health circles, for example, that's been around for quite a while. I see it also with agriculture. People who have worked in agriculture for a while, they know that when they go to new areas, some of the best places to go and meet some future clients or future people they're going to work with is the tennis club. It is really an amazing place. Not I was ever a member of a tennis club, but I did go along with their poor cousin, the squash club, and met a lot of good people through there, which helped me a lot in forming those professional relationships later in life.
Great. Do you have any final comments, Wes?
Look, I do. I think hopefully tonight, if you are not a social scientist and interested member of the public, etc., that you've been able to see a little bit about what social science is about and what social science can do. And one of the things that we do, I think, really well is collaborate and work with other people. And I know through my personal experiences, even in recent years, as now I've reached semi-retirement, is still working with people from many different aspects of my professional career and in other disciplines. The importance of this collaboration and how we as social scientists actually have a lot of the experience and the skills to be able to work with other people, and utilising those skills, hopefully we can bring other people together as well to address some of these difficult questions that still face us around the world, not least of all the pandemic, but let's not go there. So over to you, Jen, to wind up for this evening.
I think that was a great comment to finish on. So I will bring this webinar to a close and thank Wes for his time in putting in the presentation and sharing that with us. And to everyone who's come along, it's really great to see your interest in this field. It's something I'm interested in as well. And I also would like to say it's nice to see some of my former and present students here as well. So shout out to all of you. So thanks everyone for coming. This recording will probably be on the ILWS YouTube channel. Yes, we can direct you to that through the Eventbrite email. But thanks everyone for coming, and we hope to collaborate and meet you all again soon. And don't hesitate to get in touch with Wes if you want to follow up on anything that we've talked about tonight. So thanks everyone.
And there's my contacts, just to finish off.
There we go.
Okay, and as Jen said, this will be available, so thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you around.